This section recognizes the runtime exception and checked exception. It's a difference. So as the name suggests, a checked exception occurs at check time. Runtime exception occur at runtime. So is specific. In fact, we can look back to when you first started learning Java. Did you start with this JAVIC check to a bytecode file, and then run it by executing Java commands? Okay, so in the diagram, you can demonstrate. Let's say I draw a diagram here. This is a Java component like Hello World. We have to check it first. This is called check. JAVIC. JAVAC.exe. This is called check. The result of the check. Does it generate a class file? So this time, are we going to start executing? At this point, we're going to execute. And this execution is to be a command called Java. So you can see, this time we correspond to this point. This point we call checked. Right? And for this point we call it execute. So a checked exception means that a problem at this point may occur. Checked exceptions right here. And this next one in the execution period. It could be an execution exception. Execution or runtime exception. Runtime exceptions. Okay, so this is one of the places where they have an exception. This check period is that we're not even running yet. There will be a few red flags. This is the basic characteristic of checked exceptions. You can take a look at the checked exceptions are generated during check. And they must be handled. Otherwise, the program can't work properly. This is called a checked exception. It's also called a checked exception. Okay, so here's the thing. Is that the editor checks for exceptions. If an exception occurs, it has to be handled. Then we can show him a demo. Just watch me. Okay, so as you can see, now, we haven't run it yet. And then the method just explodes. That's what happens during check. We have to deal with it. Otherwise, when you run this program with a red line, you must not be able to execute. Right, you can see the message at the bottom. He says there's an unreported exception error. Then it must be captured or declared. That means there are two terms involved here. One is called capture, and one is called declare. These are both ways of handling exceptions. This is something that will be covered in the next video. So now it's time to learn about. This is a checked exception, so it can be captured. It means try catch. And the declaration is throws. These are the two ways of handling exceptions. That's how you handle checked exceptions. Well, that's the first thing to understand about him. So what's a runtime exception? Runtime, as the name suggests, when you draw this picture, is it a problem that we find at runtime? When the program has already been checked, we found the problem at runtime. Well, these often runtime exception is the main thing to master. Then he won't check for exceptions. That's when the first runtime exception occurs. They don't check for exception. Then even if there is no try-catch or throws keyword, the program also checked. It's just that the program may report an error when it runs. So for example, let's remember this example from class. I'll show you. For example, arithmetic exception, the division by zero exception. So our index outofUnstänks, class cast exception. Null pointer extension, number format exception. Okay, so let's take a look at this. How to show him this runtime exception. I'm going to show him. You mean this exception? You can either think of throws or try catch. Let's note this one for him. Checked exceptions. Checked exception occurred during check. It is required to be handled. Otherwise, the program can't be executed. So the way it is handled. There are two types of replenishment. So there are two. One is capture. The other is declare. A declaration is throws. Okay, this is an editor exception. Okay, so let's look at the runtime exception. Most of the exceptions you'll encounter are runtime exception. Let's say I have an array here. Now, let's access. If we write a 3, that's exceeding its boundaries, because the maximum index for an array is 2. At this point, let's run. See if there is an exception. And this exception, does it appear after the execution? There's a description of the cause and location of the exception class. This is a runtime exception, so this includes. This is called a arrayIndexOutoFins exception. And this arithmetic exception that I just showed you. The rest of these exceptions are runtime exception. This kind of exception are usually caused by logic errors in the program that can't be recovered while the program is running. Then this is a normal demo. So the next lesson, we will introduce how to deal with